So imagine walking into Agra in some 16th century and you find there's a garden and it's like geometrically divided and there are channels of water culminating in the center, turning into a favvara or a fountain. And there are plants and flowers and fragrances and beauty all around. Uh, it's difficult to imagine that Agra from now, but that's what we are going to talk about in this 500 years of Mughals conversation, which I'm having with Dr. Alka Pande. This is the episode 3 of Art Indica with Dr. Alka Pande and Nidheesh. And this season is about 500 years of Mughals, and we are talking about their art and aesthetic. Welcome, Dr. Pande. And then we start with this, that this episode is about uh, Mughals in public spaces, the way cities and urban spaces were before Mughals came to India, and how they changed it forever and in a good way.
Thank you for that question. It sets me thinking, Nidheesh. I'm also trying to, as you said in your opening lines, picturing 500 years ago. Now, my imagination has to go back 500 years ago. How do I recapture that beauty? Through the muraqas of the Mughals, through the paintings, through the recreations of Indian cinema. Because the open spaces today, and particularly when we are living in urban metropolises, they are really shrinking. Even in a city like Delhi, where we had these beautiful roundabouts, and it was known for the Mughal gardens, we rarely get to see the Mughal gardens. Of course, when Rashtrapati Bhavan opens in the winter, we get a chance, or now the new Sundar nursery, we go for a stroll there. But when I think of how the Mughals recreated these public spaces, I think the first thing was that even though Babur came and invaded India, he actually quite hated Delhi. He hated the dust, he hated the heat. And as we had said in our first episode, he was always thinking of Farghana. So, what he started thinking was recreating the gardens, and the Mughal gardens were all about the Charbaghs. And I think some of the best gardens we see started in the time of Humayun, and the high point was at the time of Jahangir. But Jahangir loved Kashmir. So he went to Kashmir and started creating the Mughal gardens or the Charbaghs there. Now, the Charbaghs were really quite a geometric grid. Char means four.
Yeah.
And the division of a space into the grid of four was very different to what it was in pre-Mughal India. Or maybe, I don't like to use I don't want to divide centuries through religion, but we could say before the Islamic people came to India, it was more about Vana Upavana Vatika. You hear about the Vatikas in the Ramayana. You hear about the Vanas in the Mahabharata. And then you see the tanks and you see ponds near temples in what you call Hindu India.
I mean, we hear about it in Mrichikatikam.
Yes.
So, and there this whole thing about going out to the Vatika, Upuvan, which is it's like a sub-forest, if we translate it in English. So they will all go for a stroll, or the lovers will go out and meet there. So that was the kind of place. But in a cityscape, creating that kind of, and probably that's what make it a very Mughal thing, that to have
Yeah,
a
because
garden in the cities.
we
The cities itself basically were probably different before the Mughals came.
So we, as such, our cities, as you rightly say, were different because also it was only in the Mauryan period in the 3rd century before the Christian era that all the 16 Mahajanapadas came under one republic. So what you have in these cities also, you had a city center. When you look at the Kama Sutra, you see of the city slicker, the Nagaraka. So cities were lavish cities, and they were not very highly populated as it happened by the time the Mughals came. The Mughals brought in, I think, a kind of a very organized, structured system, because there was the ruler, then the mansabdars, then the nobles, and then the proletariat. Similarly, in the Charbagh of the Mughals, you had that Timurid kind of a thing where the king sits in the center and he surveys the entire city by being in the center of the universe. That's how Jahanpana. And what you see is there that later in the Red Fort you had these chadar, they called it, the marble channels from which fountains came. And this was a great engineering feat because it was the pressure from the Yamuna that the water came. And there was no electrical or any other kind of pressure points that were there. But it was also very scientifically done, based on the Naher-e-Bihisht, as they call it, the 4 rivers of paradise, where there was water, milk, honey, and wine. So you had all these beautiful things coming out in the charbags. Plus, they grew fruit trees, where the emperors, it is said, ate mangoes from the trees. They grew a lot of beautiful flowers for their fragrances, like the jasmine, like the roses. And later we see that they used a lot of itar too. So there was everything in this charbagh. And the charbagh was akin almost to the pleasure gardens, which you read in the time of Kalidas in early Sanskrit poetry, where the king would be with his concubines, swings.
The harems.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Hindu kings did not have harems, but later the Mughals had huge harems. And before the Mughals, you have evidence a lot of the pleasure gardens in early Sanskrit poetry, in Bhartrihari, in Kalidas. You know, you talk a lot about nature and beauty. But with the establishment of the Mughal gardens, the Charbagh, there is a beautiful structure which comes in. And you have pleasure, you have fragrances, you have power, you have authority. And at the center of it sits the Jahanpana.
And it's also like bringing that forest bit to the city, that, earlier probably people were going out from cities or dwellings to, because even cities were like kind of probably big kasbahs, or when there would be cities probably, which would be cities in north. I mean, Banaras would be one, which clearly comes to my mind.
Was another.
Ujjain, maybe Jaipur to some extent, I don't know. And so when Patliputra was a hugely big old city. So yeah, those cities were there, but then when we look at their own structure, and it's difficult to imagine how they were in those centuries. But clearly Agra and Delhi especially, when you move into Shahjahanabad, the Lal Killa, and then you look at the Jama Masjid, which is probably one of the biggest in the world, and then walking through the Chandni Chowk. So it's like the whole complex itself is a huge defining stamp of what Mughal power would be and how they would see their world order.
So what I think, it is like this, that, Babur hated Delhi. Humayun died in Delhi. He called it the Deen Panah, the city of refuge, the city of shelter, because unfortunately for him, he spent more than 14 years out because he lacked the brilliance of his father, military brilliance.
Yes.
So, And he came back just for not even a year, and he died. But
And which happened in Purana Kila, which is
yeah,
next to the zoo and current Pragati Maidan in Delhi.
And they also link it to the Mahabharata.
Mahabharata.
They link it back to Indraprastha. So what we see is that these were 4 or 5 in North India important cities: Kashmir, Delhi, Agra, and Lahore. These were the areas in which the early Mughal rulers were inhabiting. Delhi becomes very important because after Akbar, Delhi becomes the capital. Shahjahanabad becomes the capital, from where Shah Jahan really constructed a whole new city, whether it was Chandni Chowk. The lovely stories of Chandni Chowk, कि रात की चांदनी में कैसी सिटी दिखती है तो चांदनी चौक कर दिया.
Chandni means moonlight. I mean, for people who don't know Hindi, I mean, so it's like it's a bazaar, it's like a marketplace.
Which is lit by
the moon, yeah.
So it's very interesting. And then, as you know, that I think it was Roshanara Begum who supervised the big Jama Masjid, and the ruler could look from his red fort. And then it was a time when Shahjahanabad became the focus of the Mughals. Before that, of course, it was Akbar who created the city of Fatehpur Sikri, Agra, the Red Fort, the bazaars in Agra, Sikandra. All these were great building exercises of the Mughal rulers. And this happened in North India, in basically these 2 cities, Agra and Delhi, basically.
They did a bit of things around in Ahmedabad and other places, but then clearly the signature stamps are here. I mean, you can sense the whole scale of it. That because Delhi actually has, I think, 7 or 8 versions of the city, and they kept, people kept conquering and making their own cities here. And so then finally, the final version will be Lutyens Delhi, which is the New Delhi. But this is Shahjahanabad was, now it's called Old Delhi, but that time it was New Delhi. Then and the then New Delhi would be Shahjahanabad, and people would be looking at it and the whole, I think, the world around, the power would be concentrated in that. I mean, we know about the poets and the military people and people coming from elsewhere, settling in the traders. It was a great trading place. It still is. I mean, if you look at...
Well, I don't want to be so negative and nasty about the British, but they really ruined the Red Fort without much sensitivity. They broke down all the beautiful building places for the mansabdars and the bazaars which were created, and created military barracks out of them. So the grandeur and the thought of how the Mughals, because I personally feel when I look at royalty and kingship in 5,000 years of India, I really find the Mughal rulers, all of them, to be highly educated people. They had highly evolved aesthetic senses. So think of all these people. They studied philosophy. They may be pleasure-loving people like Jahangir, because Jahangir is supposed to be the most pleasure-loving of them all. The others were Babur invaded, Humayun brought it back together, Akbar consolidated.
Maximized it, I think. And he was...
No, Shah Jahan maximized it.
He spent the thing which Akbar kind of made the biggest emperor of the...
And then he brought in grandeur and scale. And then I think with Aurangzeb, probably it was contained, and then the downfall started. But what they did in that particular 200 years, the public spaces and the buildings they created brought in the idea of a grand India, a spectacular India. And we will see that also in the Deccan. We are concentrating on the Mughals, so we're not really going down to the Qutub Shahi.
We will talk about it, in our future episodes. But currently, since this is what is trending, so we're talking about for 500 years of Mughals. Yeah.
So I'm limiting myself to the north.
Yes, yeah.
And that is why I'm saying they brought in this great, as we said even in the early episode, from red to white. They brought in this spectacular kind of building. And today we see in Humayun's tomb, which has been resurrected thanks to the Aga Khan Trust, you are seeing a whole kind of uh, public spaces, including the Roshanara Bagh, including Shalimar Bagh in Delhi, the baghs that they created, and how ultimately Roshanara Begum was interned in her palace, which was created outside the city. So you see all these beautiful palatial buildings, luxurious buildings, and large spaces. They're so different to the small, narrow Rajput palaces which you see in Rajasthan. This had scale as never before. As you walk up the ramparts of the Lal Killa, you realize the grandness, whether it was the Diwane-Aam or the Diwane-Khas or the shops which lined the spaces, that how it was a whole township in itself.
In both the places, I mean, in Agra and Delhi, one of the things which I noticed was where were the women and what kind of proportionate space or importance given to them which I thought was pretty small compared to the rest of the whole opulence of it, because so there was this whole thing called Diwane-Aam, where it was open to the court and people could come and meet them. And there was Diwane-Khas, where the king will have his own private meetings and conversations. And then in that khas somewhere there will be all the queens and the harem.
Yeah, it's actually quite surprising because, when you ask me a question like that, it makes me think that even though there were such strong women who kind of were the backbones of Mughal rule, beginning with Akbar's foster mother, you go to Noor Jahan, you come to Mumtaz Mahal, you come to Roshnara Begum. They're all very, very important women who controlled a lot of the empire, but they are hardly seen in the visual mapping of the Mughals. A very interesting point, because when we discuss Mughal paintings, you'll see that there is such a small space for women. Most of them are men, most of them are courtiers, most of them, as in the time of Akbar in particular, he uses painting as a document to see who he was talking, what he was doing. But where are the women? You just see one Khojasta in the Tuti Nama, or in the Anwar Suheli, you see a few women. But where are the women? They are cloistered in the ramparts of the Zanana. They are guarded ferociously. And even though in their private spaces, they are very, very important. And to a large extent, also politically, they are, that's why I think the petticoat government becomes so important here, that they controlled a lot of the mind of the rulers, particularly.
Because so many of them are also coming from other royalty families, even Rajputs, and so. But then, do they find that kind of representation or importance in the arts and the?
They were important, but they are never represented. They are never given their due representation, as you see that even in contemporary times.
So returning to again, I mean, these three, like this complex of Red Fort, which is still functional in terms of India. It represents every 15th of August, India celebrates its independence on that building. on that structure where the Prime Minister will go, and there was a whole big event happening there. So it is still functional and iconic. It represents India's sovereign, republic. So Red Fort and Jama Masjid again is the biggest mosque in India, if not in the world. It's like one of the biggest in the world. And Chandni Chowk. And even Chandni Chowk, I think, has been resurrected now. I mean, there's kind of a refurbished in a way, which is like you can get some glimpse of the old charm. Not so much.
I think the legacy remains, Nidheesh, because Chandni Chowk was so bustling. It was a marketplace where there were all kinds, business happened. In a way, it was like the Wall Street of India. All the business community was there, the Jains were there, the traders were there. So that was a hub.
The textile, the spices, the jewelry.
Everything.
The money keepers and lenders and
yeah. So it was a hub.
Yeah.
How do you not recreate it? Today also, the largest wholesalers sit there. Today also, when you go to buy your dry fruit or even the
Khari Bauli and Chowdi Bazaar for, the whole...
Yeah, and mithais, the sweets.
Yeah.
Even today, the old legacy continues. So I think sometimes you can't erase tradition. So in a way, the tradition of great divine kingship, authority, and, when you speak from the ramparts of the Red Fort, you're actually talking down the ruler and the ruled. It is literally that.
Yeah.
So it becomes very, very iconic by way of identity as well.
So what is specific about these three structures? I mean, in terms of aesthetic?
One talks about religiosity, the Jama Masjid. It is a beautiful masjid, the space, the spectacle, and the prayers that are held there. So when you look at so many photographers have taken from Cartier-Bresson to Raghuraj to all important photographers when they've taken photographs of Eid prayers. You see the whole humanity and sea of people. So it becomes an emblem of religion there. Chandni Chowk and other buildings then become emblems of trade and business. Red Fort becomes that of authority. So all the three buildings have a purpose and they represent a certain layer of society through religion, through politics, through social norms.
And how was Delhi before Shahjahanabad? I mean, when we look at it, so there is, as I said, like Purana Killa was there where Humayun died, but it's like also connected to the Pandavas, this Mahabharat.
Delhi was made of...
But then we have Tughlaqabad, and we have Mehrauli, and we have like this Siri Fort.
So Delhi was made of 7 cities. So you began with Purana Killa, you began with, how should I say, from the time of the Mahabharat, you come down to the time of the Delhi Sultans, you come down to, before that, to Alauddin Khilji, which is near Hauz Khazi. So you have 7 cities. That's why they say that Delhi is a palimpsest of cities. You peel one layer like an onion, another layer comes out. And Delhi is not that big at that time. It went from Mehrauli to the walled city. So the slaves began, the slave dynasty began from Mehrauli.
Yeah.
Then before that, of course, is the area of Purana Killa, which was mentioned as the old Indraprasth. You have Tughlaqabad, you have, and then you come down to Shahjahanabad, which was the last, and as you...
The signature place of...
And then of course, Lachin's Delhi.
Which becomes the center of when you say Delhi, like that fort and that area is the
The
center.
walled city, they call
And the
it now.
New Delhi is new, which like there's a relativeness to it, and which is new, and then which we can see, which is where Delhi is right now. So, and I see it like it's like there are like lots of cotton sheets like which are like torn, and you can see each layer after layer that something will keep sprouting from, and there's the other good bit about this city that you can see them still there. The
And also, each district or each part of the city has its own culture. Like if you go to Tughlaqabad, you'll see a different kind of people living there. The geography is still different.
Yeah.
The people there are different. You go to Mehroli, look at the little Havelis in Mehroli.
You have Sarai Rohilla.
Yeah.
I mean the all kinds of Tughlaqabad, and and then you find Mangolpuri. I mean,
Yeah.
so
No, and you go to Purana to the Red Fort area, the texture of people there is completely different. And it's purely there, I find it's so syncretic. You have the Jains, you have the Banyas, you have the Brahmins, you have the lot of Muslims,
yeah,
and they are living in quite a lot of peace and harmony.
yeah.
They know how to coexist.
So old cities have that the whole syncretic thing. You will find a Jain temple and a Gurdwara and,
Yeah.
and a church and the old temple and the mosque. Too many mosques in old. I mean, all of that will kind of you keep walking into them. So clearly that is like a fascinating aesthetic of the place, and you can still feel how it was functional and how it was, but it's difficult to think how it was like imagined. This is how it's going to be, and that it will be functional 500 years later as well, which nobody actually kind of thinks that way. So that is the other interesting part. But also talking about what was Deen Panah and what was Humayun's thing with Delhi.
So actually, he called it Dinapana was basically city of faith, city of shelter, because when he got back his throne after being away from India for I think 14 to 15 years in the Shah's court in Iran, whether he liked it or not, for him it resonated with him coming back and giving him shelter. It was his city of faith. And I think to that extent, because I also believe a lot in cosmic energy, he was buried here.
Yeah.
His father went back, right? Because he was always dreaming of
muskmelons.
Yeah, and actually detested Delhi, But for him, that was his hold. That he had already been thrown out of his own country.
And we also see lots of other places, like Sarhind, and then as other cities where we saw the Mughal made their forts and.
Absolutely, because when Sher Shah Suri came, that was a time when there was that great Grand Trunk Road was made from Lahore to Calcutta. So along that came the Sarais, the Karwan Sarais, the Kos Minars, and the great Grand Trunk Road became also the artery of connecting from one end of the country to the other end. So traffic started, and a lot of sarais came along the way. And if you start even tracing the sarais, you start tracing the journey of people, and then you realize that here is something. A new network is being established, because before that there was no network like that, and a lot of credit goes to Sher Shah Suri for setting up this system, and he set it up in the 14 years that he was in power.
And then Akbar comes and like he gets fascinated with Agra, and he makes his base in Agra, and then this Fatehpur Sikri experiment happens. So how was that planned? I mean, the whole architecture of the city, making a city, living there for 7 years and then abandoning it because of water problems.
So if you notice, all the rulers were very much engaged in the building of every initiative they had, whether it was Shah Jahan, whether it was Akbar, whether Jahangir did not do so much building compared to father and grandson, but with their architects, they worked together. And most of the architects were Muslim architects. And they brought in a lot of structure and a lot of scientific kind of urban planning to the cities. Uh, Akbar was developing in and around Agra itself. But slowly he also realized that his experiments with Fatehpur, as you said, failed. And then he started coming, or his son actually started moving towards Delhi. Akbar dies and is buried in Agra itself. But before he dies, he's made all these great buildings, including the great gateway to Fatehpur Sikri, the Buland Darwaza. And I think it was basically that they were digging their heels into this new space, which was their homeland. They were building a homeland for themselves here.
Clearly, they were expressing their permanence, that this is where we are going to be permanently here, and we are not going to go from here. But I mean, eventually they are gone, but those places remain, and they are functional. What about this Karwan Sarais? So I mean, how was that thought about?
Because they were traveling. Where do they stop? The horses need to rest. The travelers need to rest. So they had all these Karwan Sarais along the Great Grand Trunk Road. And they were actually like our wayside dhabas, what you have today. So these were the old time dhabas where people would rest for the night, they would refresh and start the journey again.
There are also the places where gossips will be exchanged. There will also be places where people will be fleeced. And there are amazing stories around those bhatiyarins, the women managers of the sarais. And so that's the other, this whole can of worms around Karwan Sarais and what all was happening there in history and elsewhere, the public folklore.
It talks of the very human nature, the cunning, the cleverness, the greed, the power, and women have always been at the helm of power.
True. So, and then then we are coming to the close of this thing. So how do we see now, and we summarize the whole urban escapes, the way Mughals thought about and what they have left behind?
I think the Mughals really opened up the spaces. They started coming out, as you rightly said earlier, before the Mughals, people went into the forest. They left the city like they go to their farmhouses, right?
Like, but the Hindus have this thing called Vanprasth, that you at age of 60, you go to the forest and find an ashram or somewhere to kind of live the rest of your life. But in this case, you have to kind of bring the forest in and enjoy the nature here for me.
I think what the Mughals did is they created a beautiful urban structure where the private spaces were built structures. They created a lot of public spaces for people to go out and interact with each other, mingle with each other, particularly with their gardens. And also there was some kind of surveillance also, with the king sitting right in the center of the Charbagh and his courtiers. So it was all about a civil society and great governance. So I think this is what the Mughals left us with, their public spaces. A very convivial atmosphere, an atmosphere where people went and enjoyed themselves. They basked in the beauty of nature, and yet they were also very, very particular about the environment in which, how they proceeded. Because the Charbagh also has these raised platforms. So just look at the metaphor. You walk a little high so that you don't spoil the grass there. So this is what the Mughals did. It was a kind, in my head, a kind of a refined autocracy.
And how was their interaction with the locals? Because I think there was also like lots of collaborations happening between them and especially Rajputs, and they were
I
making
think they were good diplomats.
No, in terms of city planning and architecture.
Alliances, you mean?
And bilateralism in some way, that okay, this of some things will come from Persia and something will come from here. Like, I mean, the stones, the marbles, all of these things will also come from Rajasthan.
So they were smart people. They realized that when they are coming here to stay, they also should use the local. It's like what you do today, local and global. So they were using what they had. They came with their ideas from Central Asia. They brought a lot of ideas, but they used the local craft, they used the local material, and they built a lot also with the local material, and yet got a lot of import as well.
And without losing the influence and the aesthetic which they brought from Persia. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it was a beautiful time of syncretic culture. It was a time of amalgamations. It was a time of alliances. And I think they were very diplomatic and wise people. They realized, to use that old-fashioned saying, "Samudra mein reh ke magar se bair to nahi karna hai." So if they are coming and making a foreign land their own, they are not going to quarrel with the local people, and they are going to include them in their vision of staying permanently in India.
It's important because as we see, Mughals were largely concentrated between Delhi and Agra, and in between there was Mathura, which was the biggest holy place for Hindus as Krishna's birthplace and pilgrim. So, but then this is what we will talk about in our next episode, how it absorbed Persian, European, and local influences while also collaborating with the locals, and which is like mostly coming from Rajputs who were their generals, but also others who are like people coming from Birbal, Todramal, Tansen, coming from other regions who are like from different castes. So all of that was amalgamating, and then as we discussed, that they were here to show that they are going to be, this is all permanent now. This is not a transiting
here to
thing.
stay.
We are going to we're not going to like loot you and run away from here. We are going to kind of be here and share the thing. So thank you so much, Dr. Pandey, for this conversation. I look forward to the next episode. Please keep watching us, listening to us, and enhancing this conversation about 500 years of Mughals in Art Indica with Dr. Alka Pande and Nidheesh. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nidheesh.